Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, chatting with ISO experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and today I'm here with Scott Dawson again, President of Core Business Solutions. Glad you could be with us again, Scott.
Thank you, sir, for having me back.
Absolutely. So today we're going to sort of pick up where we left off last week with CMMC, but we're going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty and talk about some best strategies for complying with CMMC. Again, if you work with DoD at all, you should be aware of this and all the many ways you can find for complying. Again, we want to thank Scott for being here, and let's get started. So, Scott, what is the scope of a CMMC assessment, and why is it crucial for small businesses?
Well, X, I think this gets down to the nut of two things. One is time, the other is money.
Which one can mean the other sometimes.
One can mean the other. I think for small businesses, I think there are business decisions being made as to whether or not pursuing DoD contracts in the future is going to make sense.
Right.
And whether paying the time and money for a CMMC certification is going to really be justified with regard to the contract opportunities that might be in front.
That's going to be very dependent on your business.
I think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, flip side, if there are a number of small businesses that do choose not to pursue contracts, that means there's probably going to be more contract opportunities for those who do get certified.
Right.
So I think it's a calculated risk one way or the other. But I think you have to go into it with your eyes open, as well. Because
in ISO speak, that would be risks and opportunities.
Risks and opportunities, exactly right. Yeah. So that brings us to your question, which is regarding scope.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, we talked about some of the barriers or difficulties for small businesses. Complexity and other things of the standard really become kind of the barriers to entry, if you will.
Right, right.
We also pointed out that the point of CMMC is to protect government documents that you might be in possession of.
Yep, CUI or FCI primarily.
And let me be a little more specific about that. So and we'll take CUI for the example for today.
Okay.
While you are in possession of CUI, whether it's emailed to you or you download it from a customer portal or you receive it in the mail, however it gets into your possession, from that point forward, you're responsible to protect it.
Okay.
If it's an electronic file, the computer systems that the CUI resides on or is accessed from or is edited from or is sent from, those computer systems all have to meet the 110 requirements of NIST 800-171. So anywhere that the CUI resides, that place, I'm going to electronically, is subject to all 110 requirements, not some, but all requirements of CMMC.
Would that not also be anything that is on that network as well? Even if, let's say Bob never looks at CUI or FCI, but his computer can still have access to that network.
Yep. So the first way to look at scope, let's call that the bullseye of the target, is where is the CUI?
The repository.
Is it in my email? Is it on my laptop computer? Is it in the cloud in my Microsoft 365 account? Is it on the server that's in the closet next to the boss's office?
Right.
Where is the CUI? In most situations, CUI, it resides in several places.
Yep.
As it kind of follows the chain of events from when it's received to when it's stored to when it's backed up to when it is then shared with other people.
Or used.
And when it's accessed and opened, maybe it's edited, maybe it's printed. And you can, envision that as time goes on, there are more than one place where electronically this file is being saved. So therefore, every place that the CUI resides has to be protected, or it becomes a vulnerability for the CUI to be stolen, to be accessed. As we said last week, that the problem that's being solved through CMMC is the pilfering of information by our national adversaries
Right.
to be used against us. So, as many places or things or computers that CUI touches, the more that are in that chain, the more things then have to be upgraded, secured, etc. And to your point, even if the CUI can be accessed, maybe it's not regularly accessed. So maybe it's in a folder that I use, but you don't normally use. But
Right.
you could click on that folder because of the way our computers are set up.
Right.
You could click on that folder and open it up and get access to CUI. Therefore, your computer and your login information, your accounts all become subject to the assessment
Right.
of the CMMC for CMMC certification.
So they would fall in scope is kind of.
So that's what we mean by scope is what devices, what people, what areas of our facility, what equipment either does access CUI or can access CUI, even if it's inadvertent, even if it's not meant to be. If it still can be, then it's a risk. So it's a door that could be opened or a window that could be, crashed in, and somebody could break in and steal that CUI. So since any device that has CUI access has to meet 110 requirements, you're talking about 110 times how many devices? Okay, now it starts to get a little crazy.
Yeah.
Because you could be talking about cell phones having access.
Yep.
You could be talking about laptops. You could be talking about visitors to your facility gaining access to your network through a guest Wi-Fi account that maybe isn't properly secured or whatever. So it can blossom into this overwhelming amount of security protections that have to be put in place. And as I say that, I go back to the time and money concern.
Yep.
That it means you've got to implement all those requirements, you've got to maintain all those requirements, and you've got to have the financial backing to bring those all up to code, to use a different analogy, and maintain those protections going forth as long as CUI is in your possession. Okay.
Yep.
Actually, it's not even that. As long as you have a contract that requires you to protect CUI, whether or not you have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another caveat. We've had clients call and say, I have a customer telling me I need to be compliant with NIST or BFARS or CMMC, but we don't have any CUI at this point. But our contract states we have to protect it. Then our response is, you need to have at least a place, one laptop, one server, one cloud account that is protected with the 110 requirements.
Right.
So that you have the capacity to secure CUI, which is what's in your contract.
Right.
So that if, in fact, you receive CUI, you'll be able to protect it.
And that makes sense, too, if you're flowing things down. Let's say you're working as a subcontractor for a prime or a supplier to one of the subcontractors. They may find a time where they need to send you something.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense that they want you to make sure that they don't have to think about, we can't send them that.
So one of the requirements for your customer to be CMMC certified is that their subcontractors are CMMC certified. Okay, let's flow that down. One of the requirements for you to be CMMC certified is that your contractors are CMMC. So it flows downhill. The broader the scope, the more of your computer systems and facilities and employees have access to CUI. The more things, the more people, the more places all have to be secured. So if you can narrow it down to a few places or one thing or one person or a small team who absolutely need access to CUI to do their job. They're your crack team that's working on defense contracts. And they work on that one contract. They're the only people in the company that do. Therefore, we could narrow things down to only their computers and maybe only a portion of our network. Or in fact, we don't even include our computers in our network. We go to the cloud.
Right.
Okay. So this is where it becomes important to not only think about how you manage your computer systems and security today, which could be more of a open environment that doesn't restrict people from having much access. We trust everybody. Maybe we do background checks, or people have worked here for years. We trust them. I don't want to go to the trouble of making them have to sign in to separate things all the time, or have to get up and ask permission. I want people to be productive, so we're just going to leave things kind of open, and everybody's on their honor to not go where they're not supposed to go, whatever it happens to be. It's not how CMMC works.
No.
You have to prevent access if you want to keep it out of scope, or keep a person or a device out of scope. So scope refers to the people, processes, systems, facilities, equipment that can or does access CUI while it's in your company's possession. So if you can narrow it down and have fewer assets, they call all these things assets, fewer assets that you'd have to upgrade to the 110, keep them secure to the 110, maintain all of that, get all of them assessed by the assessor, which, by the way, is going to cost time and money to get you through your assessment, narrow it down, smaller footprint, smaller area to secure. It's just going to make it simpler and easier if that works for your company. If you have one or two defense contracts and you can narrow things down, then that's a smart thing to do. If mostly you work in defense, and most of the contracts you have and most of the work in your shop is related to defense, narrowing scope is going to be a lot harder because most everybody needs access in that case.
So, Scott, what are the main steps to define the scope of a CMMC assessment?
All right. We're going to talk about 5 things. Okay. Quickly. One is you got to understand the requirements. And I indicated last week that there are numerous documents where this information is scattered. And you have to kind of go and read and review and compare upwards of about a dozen different documents if you're really going to dig in and understand precisely what has to be done, and maybe as important, what the assessor is going to look for so we can pass this blankety-blank assessment. I shouldn't demean this whole thing. But sometimes it feels that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
you got
another
to find
assessment.
out what you don't know.
You got to find out what you don't know. So it's reading, it's studying, it's training. And it could be that you get a consultant to help you apply those requirements, understand those requirements. But if you don't have a grasp on what's required, you can never meet the requirement. You can't outguess this thing. I think it means this. I take it to mean this. This is my understanding of what the requirement is. Therefore, if I'm a little bit off or a little bit wrong, I can kind of fall in the mercy of the auditor, the assessor, and say, "Oh, please let us off. We didn't understand. Can we correct it?" Things like this.
That's not an option in this one.
Not an option. So you've got to really understand it. And again, we talked about last week, these are highly technical areas of computer systems that we're talking about. You need a moderate to advanced level expertise in IT and security to not only understand the requirements, but know how to apply those and what the best way to secure these computers and this network are.
And a lot of MSPs don't have that.
And there are a lot of MSPs that aren't specialists in security and definitely aren't specialists in DoD. But if you don't understand the requirements, you can get yourself in trouble. All right. Secondly, you got to identify CUI. Now, if you don't get any documents sent to you from your customer that you have a defense contractor with, and you have 0 CUI, then you're kind of approaching it from a minimal footprint point of view, right? We want to do the minimum just to meet that requirement in case we get some. If you do receive documentation of any sort from your customer or from a portal that you download or related to that contract, that information is either FCI, Federal Contract Information, or CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information. 2 different categories of documents, some more sensitive than others, need more protection than others. Every company that has a contract related to the federal government has federal contract information. You have a contract, that's information. It's federal contract information. Okay, you have a schedule, you have quotes, you have other things related to
terms and conditions.
Terms and conditions. all that information is FCI. That requires CMMC level 1. If that's all you ever have, then pursue level 1.
Right.
If you receive or handle or create any technical kind of information, and there's some other information that we consider CUI, then you're talking about level 2, and that's 110.
And if it's in your contract, even if you don't handle it, but they want to have the potential for you to be able to handle it.
Exactly. If your contract says level 2, then you're doing level 2. Yeah. That's one, I guess, nice way they're going to roll this out is they're going to specify the level in the contract.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're going to identify which documents are CUI.
Right.
And yes, there's a requirement that the government mark all the CUI. That requirement has been in place for years. It is not fully implemented. There's a large percentage, maybe half, I don't know, who could know, of CUI that's in circulation, because there's millions and millions of documents, right? There's a large portion that aren't marked. So you wouldn't know if you looked at the paper, if it's paper.
Document.
Whether it's CUI. Now, there are directories on the DoD's website and on the CUI registry website that specify the categories of documents. So this type of document is considered CUI, and there's upwards of 50 or 100 categories.
Wow.
Okay?
So let's just say if you're getting something that has to do with a federal contract that's not the contract itself, it's very likely CUI.
And if your contract says level 2 is required, you need to treat it as if it's CUI. Right. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Right. So our advice is if you're required to get a level 2 certification, then treat all information related to that contract as if it's CUI. Right. Keep it in your lockbox. Keep it in your safe.
Yeah.
Keep it in your vault. Keep it in some place highly secure that we'll talk more about. Right. But that's identify the CUI. And what's the flow of that information? It's received this way by this person. It's shared with that person. It gets saved over here. That data gets backed up over there.
Yep.
We put it in our cloud over here. We send it to our other suppliers over here. So where's the flow? It's, by the way, you have to have a data flow diagram as part of the documentation. Yep. But you want to understand where does it all live throughout our system. Now, as you look at that CUI diagram or think about this flow, it might just get overwhelming that you're saying, I don't even think all these people need all this access. I don't think it should be all over the place. I don't think it needs to be emailed around.
Yeah. This printer, everybody, it's in the common area.
Yeah. I don't think it should be printed anymore. All these kind of things. So you're starting now to think about scope. You're starting to think about, let's narrow this thing down. Okay. All right. Step 3 is identifying the assets that, in fact, are protecting the CUI. What do we mean by assets? There are different kinds of assets. CUI assets, security protection assets, contractor risk management assets, specialized assets, and out-of-scope assets, which I think I like that last one best of all. That's probably the least expensive.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
But what assets are equipment, systems, servers, devices, like firewalls and switches and things like that, cloud services, all of these different electronic systems are considered assets of some kind in one of these 5 categories. So you got to make an inventory of all your assets. By the way, you do have to have an asset inventory, another document requirement. So that's step 3 is identifying the asset categories. You have to inventory.
Right.
Then you get to the fun part, which is define the assessment boundary. You get to decide how big the scope is that your assessor is going to certify.
Okay.
But you've got to make sure that you're protecting that environment or that footprint or those computers to the 110 and that nothing else can have access. There's no secluded.
Back door. There's no back door.
Yeah, it's secluded, it's protected, it's walled off, either electronically or physically.
I think air-gapped is a word.
Air-gapped it can be air-gapped. It can also be done with a subnet and electronically, so that you're just basically putting up a wall that information no one can get to. and that can't be sent from the protected environment.
And it'll tell you in those things how harsh of a gate there needs to be there.
Yeah, exactly right.
So
yeah.
again, you need to understand that.
Now, if you choose to not keep the CUI in your current system, which is an option, you could decide our current system is a pile of spaghetti.
Right.
And we don't have the IT expert to draw on. And we definitely don't have the budget to upgrade and secure and maintain all of our equipment and all of our people and all of our devices to this 110 level.
Right.
It's just overkill, totally overkill. You can decide to put CUI in a separate system.
Yes.
Typically a cloud-based system that's built from the ground up to secure CUI. And then the scope of your assessment is related to this separate cloud account.
And so that's generally going to be smaller, which generally means less time, which generally means less money and probably a less expensive.
And even if it's not smaller, you could think about it is separate.
Right.
So you could still have a cloud account. They call them enclaves. Okay. So you could have a cloud account that all of your employees have access to, but it's only for CUI.
Right.
It's our CUI place, and everybody could have access to it. It's just they never have CUI on their regular, network folders, their regular email, their regular network access or 365 account or whatever it is. So we're going to have a special place over here that's segregated.
So not to get too in the nuts and bolts or weeds about that, but that would be generally something that you're going to log into. It's encrypted end to end.
Yeah.
You're not capable of bringing it to your physical computer. Yeah. So as long as it meets those requirements of encryption and such, you can still access it, but it's just not going to be local.
Yeah, you can. I know an example a lot of people have in their mind is like Dropbox, which I don't know if they're secure enough for this or not. I don't.
Just an example. We're familiar with
there
that.
There are Dropbox-like places out there, but Dropbox is a separate place. You can put things that are separate from your computer. You can give access to other people. That's how these cloud enclaves work.
Yep.
But they're built to meet the NIST requirements.
Right. And they meet the requirements from point to point.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Then the last step, if all this isn't complicated enough, you're getting ready for assessment. You'd better review everything and validate that, in fact, it's all secure.
Right.
So whatever approach you use, you need to use, ISO analogy, some sort of an internal audit, some sort of a design review, some sort of validation or verification that, in fact, those requirements are being met, the information is secure, we're ready for the assessment. And if you've decided to narrow your scope, then this review is going to be on that narrow scope.
Yep.
And making sure that it's completely segregated.
Really appreciate you talking to us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Be sure to tune in next week for part 2 of Best Strategies for Complying with CMMC with Scott Dawson. And we want to thank everyone who's listened to our podcast today. We hope it's been informative for you. Now, if you're looking for more information about Core Business Solutions and how we can help you with ISO certification, cybersecurity, customized training, or CMMC, please email us at info@thecoresolution.com. And you can also visit our website at www.thecoresolution.com. And if you haven't already followed us on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, which is where you can find our other Cyber Hub podcast to keep you up to date on CMMC, be sure to do that, and that way you won't miss the next Quality Hub podcast when it's released next week. Have a great day.